Imagine grinding for 7 years with the same team, watching coaches come and go, suffering through one losing season after another. And just when you're ready to give up, a rookie walks in and changes everything. Sounds unbelievable, right? Well, that's exactly what happened with Kelsey Mitchell and the Indiana Fever. But in 2024, something drastic shifted. What really happened behind the scenes, and how did Caitlin Clark, a rookie, save Mitchell's career? Stick around because this interview reveals everything. For 7 straight seasons, the Fever missed the playoffs. 7 years of constant rebuilding, 7 years of different coaches, different systems, and different game plans, none of which ever led to success. And yet, through all of it, Mitchell kept grinding. She never let up. She kept proving that she was one of the best scorers in the league. But here's the thing about basketball, it's not just about how good you are individually. You can drop 20 points a night, but if your team isn't winning, people stop paying attention. And in a league like the WNBA, where every moment in the spotlight matters, Mitchell wasn't getting the recognition she deserved. And it wasn't just the team's record holding her back. Imagine going through 4 different head coaches in 7 years. Every time a new coach comes in, it's like starting over. New strategies, new philosophies, new expectations. You don't get to build chemistry. You don't get to establish a long-term identity. It's exhausting. And for Mitchell, who was expected to be the face of the franchise, it was frustrating beyond belief. She had every reason to walk away. She could have asked for a trade. She could have sought out a team that was already winning, where she wouldn't have to carry so much of the burden. But she didn't. She stayed. And that loyalty, as painful as it was at times, became part of her identity. She wasn't just another player in Indiana, she was Indiana. But let's talk about what that actually meant for her on the court. Despite everything working against her, Mitchell kept hooping at an elite level. From 2018 to 2023, she was averaging over 16 points per game, and not just as a high-volume scorer, she was efficient too. She was deadly from 3, able to create her own shot, and had one of the quickest releases in the league. Her game was built for success, but success never seemed to find her team, and it wasn't like she wasn't trying to change things. She was the first in the gym, last to leave type of player. She was doing everything she could to make the team better. But in the WNBA, one star alone can't fix everything. You need the right system, you need the right coach, you need teammates who complement your style. And for years, Mitchell didn't have that. Then came 2023, a season that for the first time gave her a glimpse of hope. She finally got recognized as an all-star, something that should have happened years earlier. She put up career numbers, proving that she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. But still, the Fever weren't where they needed to be. They were improving, sure, but they weren't contenders. And Mitchell knew that something had to change if she was ever going to see the playoffs. And then, just as she was preparing for another season, something happened that completely shook her world. In March 2024, she lost her father. If you've ever lost a parent, you know that kind of pain doesn't just go away. It changes you. It makes you question everything. And for Mitchell, it made her question basketball. She described her father as her OG, her biggest supporter, her toughest critic. He was the one who had pushed her to be great, and now he was gone. She didn't know if she could keep playing. She didn't know how she was supposed to focus on the game when her mind was clouded with grief. She even admitted in an interview that she thought about stepping away from basketball entirely. The passion that had driven her for so long suddenly felt distant. For someone who had always relied on basketball as a safe haven, this was uncharted territory. Every time she stepped onto the court, she was reminded of her father. Every game, every moment, she felt his absence. And that's when something unexpected happened. Caitlin Clark arrived. Now, let's be honest, when Caitlin Clark was drafted by the Fever, the whole basketball world held its breath. She was the most hyped rookie in WNBA history. People weren't just watching to see how she'd perform. They were watching to see how her teammates would react. Would they embrace her? Would there be tension? Would veterans like Mitchell feel pushed aside? That the rookie would get all the attention and the veteran who had been loyal through the worst years would be forgotten. But that's not what happened. Clark's presence did something no one expected. It revitalized Kelsey Mitchell. For the first time in years, Mitchell wasn't alone. She wasn't the only offensive threat. She wasn't the only player the defense had to focus on, and with Clark running the floor, Mitchell started getting more open looks than ever before. Think about it. Before Clark, every team knew that if they shut down Mitchell, they shut down Indiana. She was used to being double-teamed, trapped, forced into tough shots. But now, defenses couldn't afford to do that. Clark's gravity as a shooter and passer opened the floor for Mitchell in a way she'd never experienced, and she thrived. Her numbers skyrocketed. She started playing with more confidence, more aggression, more efficiency. And suddenly, the Indiana Fever were no longer a bottom feeder. They were a team that everyone wanted to watch. And let's not ignore the mental aspect of this transformation. When you're going through something as devastating as losing a parent, you need support. You need people around you who remind you that you're not alone. And in Clark, Mitchell found a teammate who didn't just respect her, she looked up to her. There was no tension, no power struggle. Instead, there was mutual respect. Mitchell didn't see Clark as someone who was taking her spotlight. She saw her as a partner in building something special. She described the Fever locker room as a village that lifted her up when she needed it most. These weren't just teammates, they were family. And that's what helped Mitchell push through the pain, step back onto the court, and rediscover her love for the game. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. At the start of the season, there were growing pains. Clark had to adjust to the WNBA. Mitchell had to adjust to playing alongside a true star for the first time. But by the All-Star break, it was clear. This duo was something special. They averaged the exact same points per game, 19.2. Both of them, think about that. It wasn't a case of one player outshining the other. They were equals, feeding off each other, making each other better. For the first time in her career, Mitchell wasn't just an individual talent trapped in a losing system. She was part of a real contender. And that's what makes this story so powerful. Because when you think about it, Caitlin Clark didn't just change Indiana's on-court dynamics. She changed Kelsey Mitchell's entire outlook on basketball. This wasn't just a new season. It was a rebirth, a second chance, a reason to keep pushing. And now, as we head into the second half of the season, one question remains. Is Kelsey Mitchell finally about to get the playoff moment she's been waiting for her entire career? That's what we're about to find out. So, we've talked about Kelsey Mitchell's struggles, the years of frustration, the coaching changes, the near decade of playoff droughts. We've also talked about the tragedy that nearly made her walk away from the game. But when Caitlin Clark arrived in Indiana, everything shifted. Now let's break down exactly how this duo works, how Clark's presence has unlocked an entirely new level in Mitchell's game, and why the Indiana Fever might just be on the verge of something historic. When you bring in a player like Caitlin Clark, you're not just adding another scorer, you're adding a game changer. Someone who forces defenses to completely rethink how they approach the Fever. And that's something Mitchell had never experienced before. Before Clark, Mitchell was the primary offensive weapon for Indiana. She was expected to create her own shot every single night, often being double-teamed, forced into difficult contested jumpers, and rarely getting easy scoring opportunities. Now, for the first time in her career, Mitchell is getting the easiest buckets of her life, and it all comes down to Clark's court vision. Clark is one of those rare players who sees the game 2 steps ahead. She doesn't just make the obvious pass, she anticipates where her teammates will be before they even get there. That kind of elite playmaking has changed everything for Mitchell. Think about it. Before Clark, Mitchell was constantly fighting to create space. Defenses collapsed on her because there wasn't another major perimeter threat. Now, Clark demands so much attention that Mitchell often finds herself wide open in spots she never used to get open in. Defenses can't just focus on Mitchell anymore because if they do, Clark will torch them with her passing or her deep shooting. And the numbers back it up. Mitchell's shooting percentages have skyrocketed this season. She's hitting career highs in field goal percentage, three-point percentage, and overall efficiency. Why? Because for the first time, she's not being forced into bad shots. With Clark drawing defensive pressure, Mitchell is getting the kind of catch-and-shoot looks that elite scorers dream of. She's no longer just creating for herself. She's benefiting from one of the best passers the game has ever seen. But here's the craziest part. Mitchell isn't just thriving because of Clark's playmaking. She's thriving because Clark's confidence is contagious. Look, when you go through years of losing, it's easy to start feeling burnt out, and that's exactly where Mitchell was before the 2024 season. Even though she was playing well, even though she was an all-star, you could see it in her interviews. There was something missing. Winning basketball brings joy. Losing basketball wears you down. And then Clark walked into that locker room. From day one, Clark didn't just embrace the challenge of turning Indiana around. She was excited about it. She brought an energy that was impossible to ignore. She played fearlessly, never backing down, never making excuses. Mitchell, who had been through every losing season imaginable, couldn't help but feel that energy. And suddenly, you could see the shift. Mitchell started playing with more fire. She started attacking the basket harder, playing with a new level of confidence. She wasn't just getting better shots, she was playing like someone who truly believed that winning was finally possible, because for the first time in years, it actually was. And it wasn't just about the numbers, it was about body language, about swagger, about a player who had spent years grinding through the worst moments of her career, finally getting the chance to enjoy basketball again. And Clark noticed it too. In an interview, Clark talked about how much she respected Mitchell's game. She knew that Kelsey had been the heart and soul of the Fever long before she got there. And instead of trying to take over, Clark made it clear. This was about building something together. That mutual respect, that chemistry, that's what makes this duo so special. Let's be real, when people talked about Caitlin Clark's WNBA debut, they didn't talk about Kelsey Mitchell. Everyone focused on how Clark would handle the physicality of the league. They debated whether her shooting would translate. They speculated about how she'd deal with the pressure of being the most hyped player in WNBA history. What nobody saw coming, Clark and Mitchell would become one of the deadliest duos in the league. And yet, here we are. Both players averaged an identical 19.2 points per game in 2024. Think about that. This wasn't a case of Clark coming in and overshadowing Mitchell. It was two elite guards pushing each other to new heights. Clark, the rookie sensation, bringing in a new wave of excitement. Mitchell, the seasoned veteran, proving that she wasn't just a great player on a bad team, she was a great player, period. Together they've turned Indiana from a team that nobody watched into a team that everyone wants to see. Because let's face it, Indiana isn't just another WNBA team anymore. They're a team that feels like they're on the verge of something special. Can the Fever actually win a championship? Now, here's the million-dollar question. We know the Fever have gone from irrelevant to must-watch. We know that Clark and Mitchell are one of the best backcourt duos in the league. But is this just a fun story, or is Indiana actually a real contender? If we're being honest, they're not there yet. They still need time. They still need experience. They still need to build more around this core. But here's what we do know. For the first time in 7 years, Indiana is finally moving in the right direction. For the first time, Kelsey Mitchell isn't just playing for stats. She's playing for something bigger, and that's why she decided to stay. Remember, Mitchell could have left in free agency. She could have walked away from the Fever and joined a team that was already competing for a title. But she didn't. She looked at what Indiana was building. She looked at what Caitlin Clark brought to the team, and she made a choice. I think it was worth it. The work that I put in individually and the organization being here for these 7 years, I hoped that it was going to come to a point where I'd be here. She stayed because for the first time in her career, she finally believes in the future of the Fever. And let's be honest, that says everything about where this team is headed. We've seen legendary backcourts before in the WNBA. We've seen dynamic duos that change the game. But what Clark and Mitchell are building in Indiana, it's different. Because it's not just about talent, it's about resilience. It's about two players who were doubted in different ways coming together to prove everyone wrong. And the scariest part, they're just getting started. So if you're not paying attention to the Fever yet, you should be. Because the way this story is playing out, it feels like the beginning of something legendary. So, here's the deal. Kelsey Mitchell's career was on the brink. She could have walked away, or worse, faded into obscurity. But Caitlin Clark's arrival changed everything. Mitchell is thriving. Indiana is back on the map, and for the first time in 7 years, the Fever are serious contenders. The question is, what happens next? Can this duo lead Indiana to a championship? Will Mitchell finally get the playoff success she deserves? I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. How far do you think Indiana can go this season?